Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. I'm Jonathan Capehart, associate editor at the Washington Post. It's been 64 days since Russia invaded Ukraine, but this week marked a pivot point. As Defense Secretary Austin said, the goal of the alliance is to weaken Russia so that it can't do something like this again, meaning invade Ukraine and maybe other nations. And President Biden announced another $33 billion aid package. Here to bring us up to speed on what's happening and what's to come is Dan Lamoth. Dan Lamoth. Dan, who covers the Pentagon and military here at the Washington Post. Dan, welcome to First Look.
Good morning.
Good morning. So earlier this week, U.S. defense officials participated in a day-long meeting with more than 40 nations to urge others to provide more weaponry to Ukraine. Defense Secretary Austin said that the briefings, quote, laid out clearly why the coming weeks will be so crucial for Ukraine. What is the latest intel about what Ukraine might be facing in the coming weeks?
What we're anticipating is a war that looks a lot different than what we've seen over the last 2 months. Russia has largely pivoted to the eastern portion of the country, the Donbass region in particular, which tends to be much more flat, much more wide open. The expectation is we're going to see a lot more artillery shooting back and forth at each other. This is going to be a mobile war, a lot of vehicles moving around. And not as tightly packed in. I think we're all familiar with those images of Ukrainians shooting missiles in relatively tight quarters out of forests and things like that in the suburbs of Kyiv earlier in the war. It's a different feel in the east, and I think the weapons and the tactics very well might change.
General Mark Milley, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as you know, said, quote, time is not on Ukraine's side. So what will happen if Ukraine does not receive the weaponry the U.S. delegation pressed for in its meeting?
I think there's a major sense of urgency here. Russia is sort of slowly making its way into the Donbass region. What we heard yesterday at the Pentagon was basically a few or several kilometers per day. So they're making advances, but they're slow. So the time is really now, from the perspective of much of the West, to get these additional systems, artillery in particular, but other things as well, more vehicles, other long-range fires, things that might be able to use to keep Russia at bay.
I'm curious by the choice of the word slow. Is the Pentagon, are Pentagon officials surprised by how slowly Russia is moving its troops into eastern Ukraine into the Donbass?
I don't think they're that surprised. I think what they would actually say is they're seeing an adjustment. I think the larger surprise at the outset of this war was the way that Russia made these sort of thunder runs or rapid, insertions of troops into areas without all the support you would anticipate. They didn't have logistics behind them. The airstrikes weren't carried out in the numbers you would anticipate. So they're being a lot more careful now. So you're seeing them. What they're really trying to do is not outrun their own logistics, and that requires being a lot more patient.
And so a lot of the talk in the early part of Russia's war in Ukraine, there was a lot of talk about these problems of command and control, yes, of logistics. Does the Pentagon think that those problems, that Russia has solved those problems now that it has focused its attention on the East with the tactical advantage that the East provides Russia in terms of the flat terrain, flat open terrain?
The expectation is that they've made improvements. Solved, I think, is probably still a stretch at that point. I think we're probably in a wait and see mode before we could say anything that's sort of that much of a change.
Mm-hmm. Talk about the change in rhetoric, in tone and words that we're hearing from U.S. officials, both on the military side, but also on the diplomatic side.
It's significant, and I think it's probably a couple things. I think one scenario here is that this likely becomes a long and drawn out slog. Sadly, in the East, this is not something that the most likely scenario that most people express who are tracking the intelligence and tracking possible outcomes here is sort of a long and protracted conflict in the East that is larger than the already years-long conflict in the East. So to I think counter that, and also to I think rally support you're hearing this shift in rhetoric from the West, trying to make sure that eyes stay on this conflict and trying to make sure that support, billions of dollars, many weapons, many countries involved, that's going to take a concerted effort to kind of message that in a way where people are still encouraged and willing to participate.
Yeah, I mean, I know from my own conversations with people in the foreign policy establishment who are focusing on the war, Russia's war on Ukraine. That is the message that that they were imparting, is that this is going to be months, if not years, and the concern that the attention span won't be like it is down the road. Let's talk about the nuclear saber rattling that seems to be coming out of Russia with more frequency. Is the long-standing policy of nuclear deterrence crumbling? How worried is the Pentagon that Russia will actually use a nuclear weapon?
Right now, I think they're messaging very publicly, and President Biden did this yesterday as well. That sort of this rhetoric is irresponsible. It's a problem. It's something that a modern, responsible nuclear nation would not do. But I think the other pieces of the puzzle that would draw major alarm are not quite there yet. The expectation is that the United States is watching for forces moving around that would specifically have that nuclear mission. And everything I'm hearing is that they haven't seen that kind of thing. They're not seeing launchers move. They're not seeing kinds of things that would be very serious. Another piece to the puzzle: last week, Russia launched a missile in a test. And initially it was seen, the reaction on social media and otherwise was sort of oh my, they're doing this very serious thing. Pentagon came out in short order later and said, hey, they actually notified us. They're actually still adhering to the treaty that would guide this. So there's kind of a weird mix of messages there.
It's very, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I do think a lot of people, myself included, have in our heads that, it's just a matter of flipping a switch for Russia to launch a nuclear strike. But there are a whole host of moves that need to be made that the West would be able to see via satellite and by other means long before, relatively speaking, long before a nuclear strike could happen. And on that point, there was reporting about some sort of Batphone between the United States and Russia, between, I believe, Secretary Austin and his counterpart in Moscow. Do we know if that phone has been used?
Yeah, I've had that question. There's several different lines of communication. Secretary Austin can talk to his counterpart notionally. General Milley has a long-standing relationship that whoever the chairman is at the Pentagon has had for years now with General Gerasimov, who's the most significant military leader in Russia in uniform. Everything I'm hearing is that there are tests of these lines. There's a willingness to at least say, hey, the phone's still working, but there's not substantive conversations at this point. So the hope would be that if something, that kind of crisis emerges, there's the ability to get on the horn. There's the ability to talk. Whether or not the Russians pick up is a secondary question that we don't really know right now.
Right. And Dan, in about 90 seconds that we have left, on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried is the Pentagon that Russian President Putin will expand the current theater of the war by striking the Baltic states or Moldova?
I think there's a long and short-term answer to that. The short-term answer is I don't think they believe that he has the ability to do that in a serious way. I suppose we could see long-range strikes or something like that, but his forces are pretty well bogged down. But then there's the long-term question of this, and I think that explains some of the rhetoric you're hearing from Secretary Austin and others, which is there needs to be some adjustment. There needs to be some ability to sort of gird those areas, Moldova, the Baltics, Poland to some extent, areas that could be struck at a later time, a year or 2 or 5 years from now.
Dan Lamothe, the Washington Post, Pentagon, and military correspondent, thank you very much for coming to First Look. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. You too.
All right, we're going to keep the conversation going with the opinions roundtable in just a moment. Let's go to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find Washington Post correspondents Meghan Markle and Jennifer Rubin. Welcome back to First Look.
Nice to be here.
I don't know if you can hear that feedback. It sounds like cartoon characters are repeating everything we say. But Jennifer, let's talk about Ukraine. You wrote this week about Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's comment where he said, "quote You want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kind of things that it has done in invading Ukraine." Why is this so noteworthy?
I actually think that the reaction was a little over the top. Of course, we want to weaken Russia. That's the whole point. We want to help Ukraine defend itself. That means degrading substantially Russian forces. That means providing intelligence that helps them anticipate where Russia is going. So the whole point of this is to degrade, to defeat Russia. And I don't think it's any news to say either that, as Putin said, well, this is a proxy war. Of course it's a proxy war. That's the whole point. We are helping to arm Ukraine because they are on the front lines of democracy. They are helping to defend themselves, but they're also there to defend the international order. And I don't think what Austin said was all that noteworthy. Perhaps it's noteworthy that he's saying that directly. But again, I think that is part of the effort, as Dan was saying, your prior guest, to really make clear that we are in this for the long haul, that we are committed to Ukraine, that their goals are our goals. And that's going to be the goal for the United States and for the allies, to stick with this through the weeks, months, and perhaps years that come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I put money on years. Jennifer, I'm just wondering, are some in the West just a little too concerned or afraid of agitating Putin? So the folks who are reacting to Secretary Austin's comments, or the folks who reacted to President Biden's comments in Poland when he said this guy shouldn't remain in power, are we putting having too much concern for the tender feelings of the dictator of Moscow?
Yeah, I think it is a little silly. What, we're going to make him cranky after all of this? Listen, he's a cold-blooded killer. He is a war criminal. I don't think his feelings are going to be hurt. I think the only thing that we have to worry about is that, of course, Russian paranoia, historically so, has imagined that the West is going to invade, encircle, destroy Russia. And to the extent to which he really gets this into his head or is able to propagandize that and stir up Russian feelings of being under siege. We probably don't want that to happen, because that's when you get into questions of use of WMDs. But I don't think we're there right now. This is just Putin playing to whatever audience he thinks he still has. Woe is me, look at the West, big bad America. It's, I think, a little bit much, a little bit too sweet for the situation. So I don't think we have to worry about getting him miffed or cranky.
Right. Well, given what you just said there, it makes me wonder then, don't the attacks that have been happening on Russian soil, particularly within the last few days, do you think that gives Putin, or plays into Putin's aggrieved nature about the West, and might give him a rallying point for Russians to say, hey, look, they're attacking us. Never mind that, Russia invaded, and they're responding.
Right. I think these are strikes that are very close to the border. They're on military depots and other legitimate military targets. So I don't think we have seen, in that sense, an escalation. No one's bombing Moscow. No one's invading like Napoleon's forces. So I don't think it rises to that level. However, I think it does speak to something that President Biden did early on that he was criticized for, but maybe in retrospect, he was very wise to do. If you remember, they wanted American planes at one point, the Ukrainians, taking off from a NATO base. And the president said, I think that's a little bit much. And I think that's what he was focused on, that at what point does this become, do we make ourselves a target? And from the very get-go, he said, we're not going to have American forces there. We're not going to have a, quote, no-fly zone, because no-fly zone means you're ready to strike down enemy aircraft, and you have to be prepared to strike down enemy aircraft. So I think there is a bit of a balance. So long as U.S./NATO troops are not involved in those border skirmishes, I don't think we've changed the equation very much. And I think right now, Putin is rather desperate to show that he really can crush little Ukraine. And that's why you see this massive artillery operation at a slow crawl begin to form.
You know, Jennifer, I just want to announce to you and everyone watching, this is just going to be a conversation between me and Jennifer. Unfortunately, Meghan McArdle's connection, we couldn't hold it, and that explains some of the maybe Alvin and the Chipmunk sound you might have been hearing in the background at the start of the conversation. So, Jen, like I said, it's just you and me, kid. So President Biden announces, we know, another $33 billion in aid for Ukraine. And there's no danger that Congress won't approve this package. However, my question is, how many more times can the president go back to Congress before its resolve to aid Ukraine cracks?
Well, I think that is the $64,000 question. Right now, despite a certain segment of the Republican Party, there is very strong bipartisan support for Ukraine. And I think Putin's war crimes and brutality have only increased the West's resolve. So I think less problematic are the arms sales and are the humanitarian support. I think where you're going to see some weakening and some concern is over energy prices. The Germans have just announced that they too are going to end import of German fuel, of Russian fuel. That's going to create problems for them. So I think what we need to be concerned about is public angst and anxiety about rising fuel prices, in turn Congress's concern, and that there would be some pressure to either bring this to an early close or to somehow ease up on the energy sanctions. That, I think, is a more problematic political problem for the administration.
Want to switch gears? Want to talk about Elon Musk and his purchase of Twitter? Here's my number one question before we get into your comments and your columns. Am I right to be concerned about Twitter, which is this enormous platform in the United States, but also globally, is going to become a privately held company?
That is a very interesting question. These have almost become like utilities, like the phone company, or in the old days, the telegraph. And there is some concern that if you put something like this in complete private hands, that is, there's no shareholders, there are no outside boards of directors on the board, that this becomes sort of the plaything of a Bond-like villain, and he would somehow misuse it, abuse it, use it to influence elections, to target individuals. And that, I think, is a legitimate concern. And it goes back to an even larger problem, which is we really do not have any rules of the road when it comes to the internet. The EU just this past week announced an enormous new regime of regulations, of requirements, transparency, and the online world is going to have to live with that. And interestingly enough, Elon Musk is going to have to live with that if he wants to operate in Europe. So in some sense, we may get the benefit of that, but we are not ourselves driving this conversation. And there has been pressure on Congress for some time now to act, either to simply require disclosure of what these algorithms actually do, or to at least require that they live up to their promises of removing hate speech and removing dangerous disinformation. So I would hope, although this is probably fanciful, that Congress would take this as further reason to begin to seriously legislate. For a moment there, the right and the left were unified in their dislike of the internet companies. The right thought that they were all out to get conservatives and were knocking them off of Twitter and other platforms, although the far right actually dominates in many of these respects. And the left doesn't like monopoly power, doesn't like the refusal to regulate hate speech. I think for a moment, at least, we had some bipartisan agreement. I wonder now, however, that Musk, who is becoming some kind of folk hero to the right, is going to slow the enthusiasm, dampen the enthusiasm on the right for any kind of regulation. Now that they have their guy in charge of one of the major online platforms, they may be less enthusiastic about regulation. But I really would hope, and the president said he's in favor of this, it's just fallen to the bottom of the priority list, that the United States we begin to think seriously about what kind of rules of the road we have. The social media companies enjoy something that the Washington Post, that other traditional media outlets do not, and that is exemption from liability. They can put anything up there and not be sued for defamation or for false light on all of those torts. And there's been a lot of question. Do they deserve it? Should that be conditional? Why is it that one sort of media gets that kind of protection? So I think these are some of the questions that are going to continue to be had. And of course, we never really know what Elon Musk is going to do. Is he really going to go through with this? The Washington Post on our front page today has a discussion of that. There may be reasons why he eventually drops out, even now. So we're going to have to really watch and see this guy. He's mercurial, to put it mildly.
Yeah. Jennifer, so Elon Musk said this week, free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy, and Twitter is the digital town square where matters vital to the future of humanity are debated. Okay, the first part is true. The second part is, yeah, it has become the town square. But I'm just wondering if Elon Musk is wildly underestimating what Twitter can do to democracy.
Yeah, or he doesn't really care, which is, I think, more to the point. The reason why this kind of raised concerns is, in a constitutional legal sense, Twitter is not governed by the First Amendment. Twitter is a private company, whether it was owned by stockholders or it's owned by one person, and they have a free and absolute right to put up what they want or not put up what they want. And in the past, virtually every online company, with the exception of things like Parler and maybe Donald Trump's new outfit, have taken the position that not everything should go up. They don't want to put up scenes of crimes in progress. They don't want to put up terrorist threats. They don't want to put up gruesome material. And during the election, for a brief moment there, they were taking down information that was conveying disinformation about the vote. They've tried to take down some information that's been disadvantageous in the fight against COVID. So there has been this notion that, yes, it is a medium where people get to talk about whatever they want and advance whatever views they like, but that these companies don't want to be seen as promoting crime, as promoting death. And I think Elon Musk underestimates the degree to which the marketplace is going to require him to moderate. If you're a advertiser, for example, do you want to be on a platform in which side by side with your product, there's a video of a crime in progress, or side by side with you, there is enormous, gushers of hate speech? That may not work for him on a financial basis. It may not work because advertisers don't like it. It may not work because individual consumers don't like it. And of course, now he has to deal with the European regulation whole system. So I think he may find out that there's more need to regulate and moderate than he might have imagined. And I think we forget that Elon Musk, like many billionaires, thinks that he knows everything about everything. And this is really very different for him. He created PayPal, he created a car company, created a space company. But to some extent, this is a bit new for him. And he's going to have to find someone, first of all, to run the company. I don't imagine that he's going to be doing the day-to-day business. So he's not going to have, I think, the sort of intimate fingertip control that he might imagine, or that his critics might imagine.
Jennifer, real fast, because we've got about maybe 90 seconds left, and I want to get your thoughts, because you've written about this as well. Vice President Harris testing positive for COVID, and you wrote about how her diagnosis, quote, can help shift how we live with it. Real fast, how so?
It is not a death sentence anymore. We don't have to live in fear that a vice president or another high official is going to be knocked out of office because of it. We have very effective vaccines. We have very effective boosters. We have viral therapies, antiviral therapies. And I think we need to focus on using all of those, making those widely available so that COVID, although it can be serious if you have certain ailments or if you are not vaccinated, for the average person who is vaccinated, who is boosted, they can get on with their lives. And if they do contract it, they may get sick, but they're not going to get hospitalized. And I think this move from the pandemic fear of death to a serious but very manageable health issue is one that we need to do. And having gone through it herself, I think she's the perfect person to begin to explain this to the American people.
You know, as someone, as a person of a certain age who is now not only vaxxed, but now double boosted,
Yes.
you know, I am.
Me too.
I am thrilled to know that all these shots are meaning that if I do, you know, knock on wood, well, if I do get COVID, which I haven't had, knock on wood, that I will just, my symptoms will be mild. If my reading of the clock is right, Jennifer, for once, we are out of time. Jennifer Rubin, thank you very much, as always, for coming to First Look. We got to go. Have a good weekend.
You too, Jonathan.
Head to WashingtonPostLive.com to find more information about upcoming interviews. Again, WashingtonPostLive.com. I'm Jonathan Capehart, Associate Editor at The Washington Post. Thank you for watching Washington Post Live's First Look.